of the Montana Strategic Waiver webinar series. I want to thank you guys for all making the time to join us. We know that a lot is going on at this point in the school year, and just again, thank you for all you do to support students in your respective schools and your partnership on all of these activities. Today, we're going to share with you some information on the current addendum process, as well as the Montana Strategic Waivers, and plan on eliciting your comments and questions on these topics. As you guys just indicated with selecting yes, this webinar will be recorded in accordance with our public record requirements, and we will post all of these materials, including the recording, on the Montana Strategic Waiver website after today's meeting. So for our purposes, we also have the live transcript on, and we'll also ask you to make sure that you have your name clearly visible so that it can assist us with our note-taking and minute purposes. For today's webinar, we wanted to kind of break things out a little bit for you, and so we organized the agenda a little bit differently for this meeting. Similar to previous meetings, if you've joined us in the past, given the size of our audience and also the virtual nature of this and our intent to really capture the essence of your concerns, your questions, your comments, we're going to use the technology a lot today to assist us with capturing that. We will be using the Menti tool for that. And I ask that for any verbal comment or questions that you would like to share, if you could just pause to have those at each section break in the agenda. So those would be the kind of big red slides that indicate when we're going to transition to a next session of the agenda. As we work through today's session, Marcy's going to be sharing information with you in the chat for your reference and access to any of the documents that we have available. And in kind of pacing for today's session, we have 64 slides prepared. However, 20 of those are questions that we have embedded to elicit your comment and feedback. So before we get too far along, I just want to make sure that we provide a little bit of disclaimer of the content that we have included in today's materials for you, and that is that these slides and details are current as of today's date, and they're rooted in the laws, regulations, and OPI's policies for testing, accountability, and reporting. We're going to cover information on each of these. We're also going to provide you with the opportunity to ask us any questions and answer those for you, and also collect your concerns, comments, ideas around some of these topics. It's really important. Really, the purpose of these is public participation. So we want you to have that opportunity to submit your information within the Menti tool, and also come on off mute if you want to verbally make any comments, recommendations, or provide us with that information so we hear those real world concerns. However, just kind of business practices, if you're not talking and there are some distractions throughout today's webinar, what we may actually do is mute you just to make sure that we have as few distractions as possible. So if you're unfamiliar with the Zoom features, I know many of us are Zoom power users given where we're at with everything these days, but if you're not as familiar with the technology, the little microphone there on your screen that allows you to mute and unmute yourself. If you're got that red X through it, that means that your sound or your microphone is muted. If you want to come off video, we'd love to connect with you virtually in this fashion, get your reactions and your indication that we can move forward. That's a great way for us to get to know you and you to get to know us. At this moment, if your name is not clearly listed, so first and last name and affiliation, what I would like you to do to assist us with that note-taking purpose and the minute purpose is if you click on the participants option there, you should open up a new window where all of the participants in today's session are listed there. And if you'd hover over your details and select that More button and rename yourself so it's clearly visible for Chantel, that your first, last name, and affiliation is there. So for public participation, there's a lot of ways you can do this. You can raise your hand in the participant panel. You're indicating just by being in attendance today that you're participating in this opportunity with your information clearly listed. You can submit chats. All chats will be captured for the record. You can participate by coming off mute and via Menti. If you have any technical assistant needs or concerns, you can also use that information that Marcy's sharing in the chat to get some help with that. So before we get too far into the agenda, I just want to pause to see if there are any questions from that technical side on how to participate in this process or the way we have it organized with the agenda. All right, great. I'm not hearing any or seeing any come through. So what we're going to do is start with OPI introductions. As we are introducing yourself, if you'd like to take the step and introduce yourself in the chat, be another great way for us to get to know you. In there, you can just provide your name and also where you're from, possibly why you're here today, what you're hoping to get out of this session. I will start with introductions, and then I'll let my teammates on the call introduce themselves. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashley McGrath. I am the State Assessment Director for the OPI. I have been with the OPI since 2012 and in this position a little over 2 years now. And prior to my work at the OPI, I was a high school biology teacher. And if we could just introduce ourselves in the order of the screen, please. Julie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Julie Mergel. I'm the Senior Manager of the School Innovation and Improvement Department. I oversee units in the accountability system, as well as the state accreditation system. And so those things are both relevant to the conversation that we're having today. I'm a former math teacher.
Thank you, Julie. Anne.
Thanks, Ashley. My name is Ann Bauer, and I am the Data Operations Manager. My team provides that foundational data upon which the meaningful determinations are made for the accountability system. And I also manage the report card. And I am actually, though a data person, I teach, as an adjunct at Carroll, I teach literature and composition.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne. Chantel.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chantel Niederstadt. I am the NAEP State Coordinator. I've been with OPI for about 2 years now. Before my OPI career, I was elementary education teacher. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Last but not least, Marcy.
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcy Fortner. I am the Data Control Specialist and Assessment Specialist with the Assessment Unit at the OPI. I've been here for about 4 years in this role, and I'm helping out today, monitoring chat, is sending out links to you all, and I'm glad to see everyone here.
Thank you, Marcy. All right, if you didn't get a chance to join us last week, we have made these materials available to you. So there's the agenda, our PowerPoint slides, the Menti results, our minutes, and also the recording. And Marcy will send to you in the chat how to access those things via our website. It's on the Strategic Waiver website if you want more information on that. Also, January 7th session materials are on there. So really back to why does your voice matter? So this is all about public participation and the opportunity to comment on these waiver efforts. Really what we want to make sure we do is that we get a broad cross-section of stakeholders, not only because it's required through the meaningful and timely consultation under ESSA, but really so that we make sure that all the interests are represented through this process. So it truly is imperative that we hear from you about these requirements so that we fully understand the current impacts and issues and conditions that are affecting us all with COVID so that we can support students, families, staff, and schools during these trying times. So thinking about our concerned stakeholders. This slide it's created to illustrate the stakeholders that we have represented. And since the last time, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about our response to some of the survey results that are coming in. So we currently have 79 responses as of yesterday with that process, and some of the respondents had indicated there were persons or groups that were not represented within our notice outreach document. With that, what we did is we identified those groups, and we actually sent that information to those folks on Friday to give them the opportunity to comment on these waivers and participate in the process. So that right-hand graphic here, this is really nice because looking at this, we just wanted to show like the biggest group here is our stakeholders. And this is intended to show how your concerns, how the things that are impacting you right now with these testing, accountability, and reporting provisions, really how that information from you feeds up through this system so that we can essentially share that message, those concerns, those needs with the U.S. Department of Education. So moving on to the next one, maybe. This slide illustrates for you our timeline, our process, a really kind of abbreviated 30,000-foot overview of the things that we have been doing over the past 36 days. Public comment opened on December 23rd. It will close January 28th. And so we are through this process, making sure everybody has adequate notice and an opportunity to comment. But again, just a reminder, it will close that 28th. And what we will do at that point in time is compile all of the efforts and information we've received. So that includes our activities through these Zoom meetings, these webinars, that also includes the survey and all of those pieces to compile them into what we call the waiver application to the U.S. Department of Education. That will be submitted on February 5th. So covering all of that information in a little bit of a whirlwind for you, now we want to turn it over to you for this first part to just get to know who's in the audience today. As I mentioned, we are using this Menti tool, and you can complete it at your own pace. So that means you can move more quickly than I am going with the slides, or you can move much slower than I'm going. And as far as a recommendation, you can use the equipment that you are joining us with Zoom on. So a laptop, a desktop, a phone, all of those pieces allow you to engage in this process. And so the first question, so that we can ensure that we have geographic representation across the state of Montana, is to know where you're actually joining from. And so if you could let us know your zip code. So if you go to menti.com, and then you'll be provided an option to input the code. The code is 9212087. There are no spaces. Awesome, thank you. And the nice thing about this, as I mentioned, is you can complete it at your pace. It's going to continue to receive your response as you kind of get set up in the system. And this will also be open for 2 days. So if you want to come back to it, or if you want to share it with anybody who wasn't able to join us on the call today, you can share that link with folks, and they can participate in the survey as well. And all the details to how to join, if you're just getting logged in with us, are up here on the top. So the next question we have is, what does your school size look like? So are you a large AA? Are you a rural school? Are you a one-room schoolhouse? Are you actually not in a school? And the next question that we have is asking to know a little bit about your educational role. So if you are with a school system, what primary role do you have or position? And I saw some folks just log in right as we were getting with this. Just a reminder for those, if you just joined us and you're wanting to get set up, this is a survey that can be completed at your own pace. So if you take your device, whether that's your phone or your laptop, and you go to menti.com, you'll input this code right here, that 9212087, no spaces, and then you'll be able to get right caught up with us where we're at with these questions. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Julie Merkel, so she can share with you some of the key differences between the waivers and the addendum process and some of the activities we're doing. So I'll turn it over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Ashley. So under the ESSA plan, the state plan, consolidated plan that we have under the Every Student Succeeds Act, there are 3 different ways that we can amend, change, suspend regulation within that plan. And so we've kind of outlined here those 3 different ways. The first is called an addendum, and that's a process that looks back on previous waivers that have been sought or previous action, and there's something that needs to be changed looking back as a result of that. And then there's the waiver process, which Ashley's talking about with you today for this strategic waiver, which is saying we want something to happen just for a certain amount of time to waive or suspend something that is outlined under regulations under ESSA. The third is to permanently make changes looking forward, which we call an amendment. And so that might be something that happens in the future where we say we want to change something with our plan. Maybe we want to change the way that we're measuring student engagement rather than using attendance. If that's something we want to change in our accountability system, moving forward, that would be a permanent change. Then we would go through what we call an amendment process. And I know these are 3 very technical terms, but they're important for us today because we are currently seeking one addendum and a waiver that is specifically attached to that addendum. And then what Ashley is talking about, a third waiver, which is called a strategic waiver for assessment, accountability, and reporting. So just kind of wanted to clarify a little bit. Next slide, please. So what's happening is in March of 20, all testing, reporting, and the accountability system were waived and suspended back in March from COVID. So we didn't take that, and so we didn't do the testing, we didn't do the accountability system for 1920, but there were implications or results that kind of happened as a result of that. And so we are needing to look back and do an addendum because part of our accountability system requires data to measure growth. And so even though we didn't capture growth in 20, it's having an implication on us right now because we can't measure growth without having data from 19 and 20 to run our system when we look backwards. So we're doing an addendum where there's also some waivers that are for present work, and then looking forward would be any changes that would be for an amendment. We currently don't have any changes in the work for an amendment at this time, but that doesn't mean that we may not pursue them as we move forward. So I'd mentioned this a little bit. So we are looking at this addendum to say, because we can't run our accountability system, we can't measure growth data. Our attendance data is having some difficulty. We can measure graduation data. We have that graduation data from 20. We could measure EL progress because about over 95% of the students were able to complete those WIDA access tests before that March 30th waiver came. But because we can't measure growth, and growth is really important, and we can't measure our 5th indicator, we're saying, well, if we can't measure all indicators, then we probably shouldn't measure any of them. And so that means that regardless if we test, we should not actually run the accountability system on those because of the things that we're missing the data. So that said, we're going to shift everything forward. So that means that we're not going to enter any new schools into comprehensive, and we're not going to exit any schools from comprehensive at this time. It just moves everything forward a year. Same with our targeted schools. Those are our schools that we reference as additional targeted schools and improvement. Those are schools that have a subgroup of students who maybe are not performing as well as the rest of the students in the school. That process also will be moved forward a whole year, because if we're not measuring the overall school, we have no way of comparing how did those students do against all students. So we're moving that forward. We are seeking a targeted waiver. So there's two types of targeted. There's additional targeted that we do annually every year, and then there's targeted. And so additional targeted is what we have done. We've not actually been able within our accountability to start the targeted process, which means consistently underperforming for 3 years. So our plan defines that if you have a subgroup of students who consistently underperform for 3 years in a row, then you are considered what they call targeted school and improvement. You lose the A, drops off. This past year would have been the 3rd year for us, but we didn't get the data. So now we're no longer in a 3rd year and we've got this gap year. So we are putting forward a waiver to say, hey, there's no way for us at this point in time. We need to suspend that because we can't start it right now. There's no way for us to have 3 years. So that's like an addition to that addendum because it's a requirement to be looking at those targeted, and we just can't do it. So this is kind of cleanup work, if you will, from this past school year, from the 2020, from when we didn't do the testing. It's just that unfortunately the cleanup work just didn't keep right within 20, if you will, in the 1920 school year. It kind of had some leftover remnants and impacts on the 2021. And so that's why we are seeking the addendum and that particular specific waiver for targeted. I'm going to turn it over here to Ashley. She's going to be really going into deeper around a separate waiver of more of not about cleanup, but rather current, present day, what are we looking at? So thank you, Ashley.
Might help if I come off mute. Yes, thank you very much for that orientation on kind of the differences and where we're at with these activities. The terms, you know, although they're technical and it's really kind of our wheelhouse for using them, they're really important so that we can clearly make sure everybody understands what we're asking and what we're doing right now. So looking at these assessment and accountability reporting waivers for this year, so the strategic waivers, these attempt to cancel the content area assessment look. So that math, ELA, and science specifically for the spring. Our first test would be opening March 8th. Then also suspending the accountability system using this school year's information and removing certain elements from the report card from this academic year. So kind of back to the pieces of addendum, as Julie mentioned, we're not there, but if there were significant changes and permanent changes that we wanted to make, we would need to make sure that those were in place February 1st, the prior school year of implementation, just so we're all kind of rooted in and the parameters and the sideboards of how these pieces all come together. So another piece in looking at that high level overview as far as past, present, future, we're still, you know, we just came out of that universal waiver that the U.S. Department of Education initiated on behalf of all states, kind of that blanket for folks due to school closures and the concerns and challenges that were happening last spring. Well, we really not come out of that impact of COVID and where we're at with the pandemic. We still have schools opening and closing and adjusting and responding. And because of these reasons, that's really the why behind the request for the Montana strategic waivers. And so this kind of shows you, you know, the addendum, it was really backwards looking. However, that's where we're at today to do some cleanup and address those things from last year. Currently, we're in the public comment process for all of these things, including the strategic waivers and then future. So although we are doing public comment now for the Montana strategic waivers, there is really no guarantee that we're going to get approval from the department to remove, suspend, and cancel these testing, accountability, and reporting requirements. So with that, our first question is really to ask if there are any questions on those 3 separate processes that we've described for you. It's a great question that came in, and I'll share it with the group in case it's hard to read on your screen. If the assessment waivers are approved, will they be approved as a lump, or could the Department of Ed only approve part of it? So for the assessment waivers, really we're talking about the content area assessments, so math, ELA, and science. And so our suite of tests under MontCAS aren't under consideration. So for instance, access for Ls would not be included so it wouldn't be a lump in that regard. Another way I could read this is, would the department approve one of the SS sections, testing but not accountability, or approve accountability but not testing? That is something that we have heard the department essentially intimate that they are considering accountability and reporting discussions with the states, if you will. As far as I know, to my knowledge, no state has received a firm actual guarantee from the department that they are entertaining any waiver at this point in the school year for testing, accountability, and reporting. But given the information that I have heard from conversations, they are open to discussions from states, particularly around having more flexibility or option to come to agreement on what accountability and reporting could look like, due to, as they have recognized, there will be essentially considerations or situations with schools that are outside their control and outside the state's control and outside the district's control, where it's not possible. So I don't know if that answered eloquently the question here, but in my best attempt to kind of see that read both ways, that's the information I have to share there. But if I didn't get to the point and answer your question, please feel free to come off mute so I can clarify any information with that. The next piece here, one of the things we really just wanted to make sure everybody understood with our efforts is the continuation of support and services. So as we kind of look through and discussed our schools in need of support through our accountability processes, these schools would continue to receive those supports and interventions consistent with their support and improvement plan. Also, just blanketly kind of looking at all schools will continue to receive professional learning and technical assistance to support Montana's balanced assessment system as we move through this school year. And we have seen a lot of schools actually using these tools to support them with where they're at in their instructional plans. And so we just want to make sure that it's clear that we're not removing options or supports. That's not the intent behind these waivers. So the next question for you is, what questions on the OPI services to schools and continuation of support do you have? A great point that was made with the tool on the need for professional development and support with interim assessments. And kind of the spirit of time, this is complete at your own pace, so I won't call out any more on this one, but I'll move over to kind of a tour of some of our remaining key activities. So there are 4 sections included in here. At our last webinar, there were 3 sections. It came to my attention that I might want to explain these in a little bit different ways. So those columns that have that check mark indicated mean that these are things that you can count on. Either they have already taken place and are already in place, or they're things that are in the work. So first, I just want to explain, because one of the things that we're communicating is there is no guarantee with this waiver. So as of today, all of the things that we have suggest and tell us that we must be compliant, we must be lawful, that the participation for statewide assessments is not only a federal requirement, but also state. So plan on delivering these assessments this spring. With that said, there are probably questions about, well, how is that actually going to look this year? And you know, what will that mean? I wanted to clarify, in case you haven't experienced this or used the interim tools, or maybe have this level of awareness, that one of the things that we wanted to do was remove as much burden on schools as possible to deliver tests, including interim assessments. So this fall, what we did is we did a rollover of test settings. That means that if you have a smarter balanced assessment, a general science assessment, or an alternate science assessment in the Montana testing portal, those accommodations and those supports that were essentially included for that student last spring have been rolled over to this school year. I say that, and then I want to emphasize that it's really important from an accessibility and an individual student-based need perspective that we confirm that those supports are still true for that child this year. And so that is one thing we did. You know, although it removes some of that input burden, if you will, there's still that need to verify that that information is true and correct for the child. A second thing that is confirmed in the books is the science field test waiver. So last spring, we were supposed to have this field test and go through. As you guys know, nothing happened in the spring last year. And so we got an extension of that field test waiver. Participation is a requirement for us to have that waiver in place. However, what it does do is it does remove the accountability and reporting pieces, so that essentially you don't have to act or do anything with the scores from that administration. So the field test waiver has been confirmed. Current things, we just mentioned, you know, plan on delivering these math, ELA, and science assessments this year, because that's what the law has in place for us, and that's what we know today to be true. Where possible, the OPI will extend test windows. So smarter balance, general science, alternate, that's pretty easy for us to essentially extend on the back end and have that available. Some of the others, there's a few other things as far as consortium discussion or test delivery contractor things to work out, but we are in conversations and deliberating the need for that as a need basis to make sure that there's plenty of flexibility this year to deliver tests. We are currently in the access for L's window. This is not part of the strategic waivers. It is a requirement to complete. We did extend the test 1 month. So that test window will close on February 26th. Some other things that are in progress that you can count on. We are shortening the Smarter Balance assessment. The average testing time, historically speaking, for the Smarter Balance test was between 6 and 8 hours. We have done some modifications with the blueprint and will implement a new blueprint that essentially will have testing times on average between 3 and 4 hours. For all assessments this spring, there is no remote proctoring option, or another way to describe that is at-home testing. That will not be available for any remote learners. And the final point on the in-progress piece here is the medical exemptions for COVID reasons. So we will make available this year for non-participation, 1 year exemption due to COVID reasons. So where we're at with that future look, so under the ESSA Section 8401 allowance, the Secretary of Education has the option to waive these testing, accountability, and reporting requirements. Also included within that statute is the department can take up to 120 days to make a determination. We have been in close contact with the department about our intentions. And so we are hopeful that this timeline for consideration and determination on our application will be more abbreviated than suggested in law. So now that turns us over to just some clarifying questions or questions in general on those pieces I just shared. So starting out, any questions on that test setting rollover? If you have those, we'd love to answer those. So for testing distance learners, the guidance that we have available, or the guidelines to support that, is it would be the district's responsibility to provide the opportunity for in-person testing for any distance learners. There are no tools in place to assess distance learners or remote learners remotely. So there won't be an option for them to take the Smarter Balance assessment, if you will, where they are learning off campus. So making that opportunity available to both the child and the parent for them to come onto campus for in-person testing. So the medical exemption, that will be made available for all state mandated assessments. So the pre-ACT, if you're using that, it's not a requirement that you report non-participation for those purposes. For the ACT, since it is a state mandated assessment, any student that does not participate has a couple of things that typically happen as far as participation rates are concerned. The only time that a participation rate is really not impacted by a child not participating is if it is due to a medical reason. So if there is a medical reason, or in this case, a medical reason due to COVID, those options would remove the child from that participation rate calculation, and that would be available for the ACT. All right. So moving on to this next question, just seeing if there are any questions on where we're at with the field test for general science and alternate. So a question about getting scores if it's a field test. That's a great question. So there's not a requirement for scores to be made available. But one of the things that we have been in conversation with our test delivery vendor about is providing feedback to districts. We heard through the comment process last school year that this was really important to districts, that if you're essentially going to participate in these efforts, that you get some feedback about the experience. So we are in those conversations and looking at what that would look like for schools this year. However, it wouldn't look the same as an operational year. By design, a field test year lets us essentially maximize our opportunity to get the items that we've newly created with our test delivery vendor in front of kiddos and see how they perform and they behave. And so we want to be really cautious in looking at the items that are made available, that they're not really used for any decision making or high stakes purposes. And I'm not sure I understand the accountability question here. I might need a little bit more information on that one to respond appropriately. So if the submitter wants to come off mute or clarify in the chat, be happy to address that. In the meantime, I am going to transition to the next slide. I just saw this one come in though. So that's a great piece of context to have for the application process on the mental health and safety of our students. So this is one of the purpose or the why behind our strategic waivers. We know that COVID has been impacting us all personally.
Ashley, we've lost your audio.
will be essentially reasons that we can't possibly consider all at this point in time. Our guidance will be made available at the end of this month. And we, through this process, will have a determination as far as the reasons submitted from the districts and an opportunity to approve those reasons. With that said, everything is on the table, but it might not necessarily be approved as things. I'm not saying this is a non-example because I think that there's evidence included in this case that's submitted here that would suggest it would be an appropriate and applicable COVID reason. But I think our guidance will be a little bit clearer on the level of justification or rationale explanation a district would need to make to describe the situation for a child who's unable to participate for COVID reasons. So the next, we've got access for ELS requirements, if there's any questions there. That is one example, most definitely. And again, I think it'll be a lot clearer through our guidelines when we make it available, how the process is actually built in for districts to submit a reason for us to consider and essentially allow or disallow any COVID reasons. So a test window extension. So this slide is specific to access for ELS, but speaking for Smarter Balance, yes, the OPI has the ability to extend any testing windows. One thing to point out with test windows extensions like the access for ELS, that also means the reporting is extended. So with access for ELS, we extended the window 1 month. Reporting those results are also then delayed 1 month as a result of that, just so everybody is clear. Any questions with this shortened Smarter Balance assessment? Great question in the Menti here. Yes, the implementation of the shortened Smarter Balance, we specifically are implementing a blueprint that will stand with us through time. So this will be available to us next school year as well. And the last question in this set, what questions on medical exemption for COVID reasons do you have? I know we got to some of those a little bit earlier in the slides. So the COVID reason is currently specific to this academic year. However, if the pandemic persists into the future and things remain relatively the same, this is something the OPI does have the opportunity to make available in future years. But for today, what we know today, this would just be available for this school year, a one-time, 1 year option. All right, with that, Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can share with us a little bit about where some of these resources are and what they are.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, so we've gathered together a number of ways to really make commenting as easy as possible from the largest group possible. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So obviously you're here today. We really appreciate your voice. We've got the Menti to facilitate that. Also, again, when we pause, feel free to come off of mute and offer comments. We'll be available a little bit after this presentation. If you have some thoughts that come up that maybe you just want to ask, that's fine too. You can go ahead and you can email us at esainput@mt.gov, and we will put that into the record as well. And then finally, there are 2 surveys that we invite you to fill out. Next slide, please. So, yep, there you go. And so this slide that you're looking at here shows you the public comment survey just on those accountability. That's the addendum to that waiver of what had already been happening from 1920. We didn't have those test scores, and so we weren't able to calculate all of that student quality, student success indicator, or the fifth indicator. And so that's what this survey is about. It's related also to a waiver for the targeted, as Julie was talking about. So we haven't had that many responses. We've had a lot better response on the other one. I invite you to fill out one or both. Marcy has just dropped the link for that into the chat. And then we have the slide related to the strategic waiver survey. And we've had 79 responses for that. And that survey closes on January 28th. The other survey closes tomorrow, actually. We extended it by 1 week. So those are two really good ways. And that might be a helpful way to help after you've had time to go through everything that we've given you in a whirlwind today. If you've had some time to process that, it might be a good thing to go back into those surveys later, because they are, some of the questions really are designed to help get to discussions about what you think after digesting the thoughts. All right, and next slide, please. So obviously you can come to the webinar, invite your friends. However, this is the last webinar. Today's is the last webinar. There will be a presentation at the ASSIST conference next week. That'll be a really dynamic gathering, and I encourage everyone to attend. If you want to know more about that ASSIST conference, you can go to the assessment page, the Montcast page on the OPI website. And that's all that I had. Thank you. Turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate it. All right, just to explain for you guys as we kind of put together and compile the application process, a little bit more into the why with everything and our purpose behind this. So it really does remain the OPI's priority to protect the health and safety of staff and students. And we know that COVID and the pandemic continue to pose significant challenges for all of us. And looking at that, there also may be some students and families who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. It continues to grow and raise concerns as cases, infections and those things unfold. And for those reasons, it really raises a lot of questions that we have about fairness and equity, especially in regards to state testing. This slide's designed to really articulate in a normal year, a historical standpoint, what the purpose of a state assessment is intended to do. And in looking at where we're at, it's very difficult this year, as we're hearing and listening to districts, for them to provide those standardized conditions for state assessment based on all the variability on what students bring as far as their remote learners or their experiences in and out of classroom due to disruptions because of the pandemic, whether they have to quarantine, etc. And for those reasons, our priority is to make sure the most vulnerable students are accounted for first, and that we really prioritize our resources towards serving all these students during these extraordinary times. So thinking again, I love this picture to really do me justice in explaining the standardized conditions and environment and what that might mean as far as a state assessment purpose. So under ESSA, the purpose is to ensure all children have fair, equal, and significant opportunities to receive high quality instruction and equitable educational services. So we look at these two groups. You've got a control group, you've got an experimental group, and the question about whether or not the student's test score will be affected by that environment. Well, you think about COVID. Do we know how all schools are teaching? Is it the same way this year? How about all students learning? Is it the same way this year? Do all systems and have access to or resources to support these variable learners and teaching circumstances? So really, given that variability in instructional settings and situations, it's not possible in a lot of ways to plan for a standardized administration the way our state assessments were designed. So thinking about those normal learning conditions, the in-person, few disruptions, and what that means, we really have to think about, can this be fair for all students the way ESSA is designed? Another way to kind of visualize this is looking at what that means as far as what does learning look like this year in that environment. So a child's test scores can be negatively impacted from their environment or external stressors. So one of the respondents had an excellent example of trauma and mental health as an example. So we think about resources as well, internet device availability, quiet rooms to study or to learn, engagement or distractions. Are they in and out of learning? What about attendance in general? So for these reasons, with the plan to deliver these content areas assessments this spring until we have a determination in place by the department, we also want to caution you against what do the results from this year mean. So causal claims, we want to, kind of caution against making those causal claims, because do we have confidence that we actually have the context and conditions to essentially understand those results from this year? Another look at this as far as that ESSA priority, that purpose, accessible to all students and fair across student groups. We know a large percentage of Montana's student population is receiving instruction primarily in a remote setting. So what we've just shared with you is no state assessment can be delivered remotely. So in offering that opportunity to these children and these parents to come in person, do we think that we will have 95% of our students participate in these assessments, or 95% of our students within those groups? The reason that 95% participation is important under ESSA is so that we have confidence that our data is representative of what our state has for proficiency and progress within our schools. So are these tools fair and representative of all of our learners in Montana? And then as kind of a final point on that why, these state assessments are designed to be technically sound, coherent, and timely to describe the student's attainment of the standards. Really, the state summative assessment marks the end in the instructional sequence, or sums up the learning. It's kind of that snapshot, that one point in time. It's, gauging that learning or a reflection of the learning. Well, that's a critical point from what we've heard from districts, because in a lot of conversations we have had, especially talking about remote learners, what is that concern regarding on learning and access for these students? Have they had the opportunity this school year to essentially be able to obtain that knowledge, skill, and ability the way that these grade level state assessments are designed to do? So the OPI is here to support schools and teachers, and these strategic waivers are designed for just that, to grant flexibility where possible so that we can provide the time, the space for our schools to focus on the basic educational services like teaching their students. So really that can help us reopen, resume, rebuild. So that's the why behind the waivers. With that, though, we know that there remains some concerns from a procedural standpoint. If these waivers are granted, there may be some unintended impacts or consequences, whether that is for progress monitoring or other performance area indicators that other programs rely for essential services with grants or programs. So we will do our best to mitigate these issues. When the department initiated these waivers last school year, a lot of these things were accounted for by design, because a lot of these programs and our grants are from that level. So for us, if you complete the survey and participate in these webinars, we get to hear if there is something we didn't think about from a funding perspective. So kind of transitioning to the final points of where we're at with resources. We have key documents that Marcy is sharing with you in the chat, so I won't kind of labor over these as we would in kind of the first webinars of the series, because there has been ample opportunity to make notice and provide these resources to the public. But do you have any questions on the documents that we have prepared? And then just transitioning over to the last set, we just want to get your support or your non-support for these efforts. So starting with the accountability system addendum. Do you support the addendum process? So that backwards look at kind of cleaning up things that were essentially where we're at today as a result of the waivers we received last year. And since you can kind of complete these on your schedule, I'll move to the next. Do you support the strategic waiver for state testing? Moving forward with the accountability. Do you support the accountability suspension? And the last set of the pieces there, the reporting. Do you support the strategic waiver for reporting? And to kind of wrap those thoughts up in one, the 16th question is designed, if you answered yes to support, what are some of the perceived benefits these waivers would have for you? If you didn't answer yes, or if you just have a concern you want us to know about, what is your overall concern about the addendum or the strategic waiver process? And to that point about funding, if you have a program or a grant relies on that and we didn't share that today, could you explain it? So I'll pause here. No, I went pretty quick through those questions. Are there any questions, concerns, or comments that you would like to come off mute to share with us? All right, not hearing any. So just kind of wrapping up on next steps, as Anne mentioned, our final installment of this series will be at the ASSIST conference. It'll be that keynote 1, so you can join us to listen to where we're at with the strategic waiver efforts, and also join us for the full program if you're interested to get critical updates with spring assessments for each respective program, a little bit deeper dive, if you will. Also some professional development on the suite of resources that we have available, including interims and the formative tools. We've got speakers that are with us from across the OPI halls. So we have voices from standards instruction, school improvement, and our data friends. So it will be a collaborative effort. We're really excited. Registration for that will close on January 22nd. So tomorrow, Friday. And with that, we just want to make sure your needs were met from today's webinar. And if there are any other concerns that you might have that weren't noticed on the agenda. So that summarizes what we have to share with you today. Our OPI team will remain on the call to answer any questions or concerns folks might have that didn't feel comfortable during the kind of pacing of the agenda to ask them at that time. So thank you all for participating in today's webinar. We really appreciate your time and your comments. Thank you, and that is it.